I am making an ogdoatic deck profile. This has been a deck I've liked ever since Ancient Guardians was being announced, just because I saw the artwork of Ogdo Abyss, the Ogdoatic Overlord, and I loved the deck ever since I saw their artwork, basically. And then I just went, I want to build these, and I played around with the deck, and I was like, this deck stuff is fun. But Ogdoatic is a graveyard-based control deck, so there's that. But also, it's a reptile archetype that's actually decent. So all the stupid reptile support, like Snake Rain, actually has use now. So moving on with the deck profile, I play 3 copies of Nunu the Ogdoatic Remnant. Nunu the Ogdoatic Remnant is one of 2 starters in the deck, where you can activate its effect to send it from your hand to the grave to also send a Dark Reptile. And if you control no monsters, or you have an only control Ogdoatic monsters, I think that's what it was. Okay, now if you have no monsters or you control an Ogdoatic monster other than Nunu the Ogdoatic Remnant, you can start summoning from your field or from your graveyard. But when it leaves the field, it's removed from play, which you don't really care about because you also play all year. So there's that. Then I play 2 copies of the other starter of Noya, the Ogdoatic Remnant. Noya is the same as Nunu, where you can send it from your hand to the graveyard, except you send a light reptile instead of a dark. But it also has the effect if it's normal or special summon, you can add 1 Ogdoatic spell or trap from your deck to your hand. Also, I'm going to go ahead and point out, I like the archetype better as Abyss, but Konami decided to change it from Abyss to Ogdoatic. For some reason, they like jipping the names here. Then I play 2 copies of Zoha, the Ogdoatic Boundless. And Zoha's effect is, if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard or special summon from the graveyard, you can activate its effect if your opponent draws 1 card, and if they do, you add 1 Ogdoatic monster from your deck to your hand, except for another Zoha, and then you each send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. So essentially, your opponent gets a Dark World Dealings, whereas you get a Foolish Burial. And then I also play 3 copies of Flogos, the Ogdoatic Boundless. Flogos' effect is, if it's sent from the field to the graveyard or special summon from the graveyard, you target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, and 1 monster in their grave with an equal or higher attack. Then that target, you special summon the second one to their field, but then the other one gets sent to the graveyard. And then both Ogdoatic Boundless monsters share the effect of, you can discard 1 card from your hand to then add them from your graveyard to your hand. So I like them for that, because you can get the high-level Ogdoacs in your hand out of your hand. Then, moving on to the bigger monsters of the deck, I do play 1 copy of Phenomenon, the King of Poisonous Snakes, and Venomenaga, the Deity of Poisonous Snakes. These are only in here because I've been wanting to play these ever since they were released, but never really could come up with a good deck to put them in. And then Ogdoatic came along. But they both share the effect of their attack points are 500 times the number of reptiles in your graveyard. If they're destroyed by battle, you can banish 1 reptile from your graveyard to special summon it back. However, where they differ is Phenomenon has the effect of it can't be special summoned by the effects of other monster effects. And Venomenaga has the effect of it's unaffected by the effects of other monsters, spells, and traps. If it deals effect damage, it can only be summoned by the effect of Rise of the Snake Deity. But if it deals battle damage to your opponent, it gets 1 Hyper Venom counter. And then once it has 3 Hyper Venom counters, you win. So it's an auto win in the deck, but is also one of the 2 boss monsters of this deck. Or one of the 3, I should say, because Phenomenon, after testing, has proven to be one of the boss monsters. But moving on to the Ogdoatic monsters, I play 1 copy of Curse, the Ogdoatic Light. 1 copy of Oliert, the Ogdoatic Dark. These two each require, say that if they're in your graveyard, you contribute 1 Ogdoatic monster special summon them from your graveyard. And then Curse has the effect of, if it's special summoned from the graveyard, you can target 1 level 4 or lower Ogdoatic monster in your grave, special summon it in defense mode. But banish it when it leaves the field. I knew there's another part, I just had to read it real quick. You can only use each effect of Curse, the Ogdoatic Light, once per turn. And then Olier, the Ogdoatic Dark, says that if it's special summoned from the graveyard, you can target 2, or target. Bleh. Okay, they have other effects that I was unaware of because by a second reading, so I know how the deck works, it's just I don't really memorize all their effects. Curse has the effect of when it's summoned from the graveyard by attributing a monster, your opponent gets to bring back a monster from their grave with its effects negated. And Olier has the effect of when it's summoned by its own effect from the graveyard, your opponent gets to add back a monster from their graveyard. But then Olier has the effect that you can take 2 monsters that are banished and put them back in the graveyard. So he lets you recycle your things so that if you have a, like, Ogdo Abyss, the Ogdoatic Overlord, if he gets hit by Called by the Grave, you can summon Olier and put him back in the graveyard and not really care. But if Olier gets banished, then you're in trouble. Then I play 1 copy of Omnesia, the Ogdoatic Queen, and 1 copy of Aaron, the Ogdoatic King. These each require 2 tributes to be special on themselves from the graveyard. But Omnesia has the effect of when a special summon from, or if a monster is special summoned from your opponent's graveyard, except during damage step, you can send 1 card your opponent controls to the graveyard. If a monster is sent from your opponent's hand or deck to the graveyard, except during a damage step, you can special summon 1 light or dark monster, or 1 light or dark reptile monster to your graveyard, except Omnesia, the Ogdoatic Queen. You only use each effect of the Ogdoatic Queen once per turn. And then Aaron's effect is if your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, except during a damage step, you can send 1 random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. And if a monster your opponent controls is sent to the graveyard, except during a damage step, you can add 1 light or dark reptile. You can only use each effect of Aaron, the Ogdoatic King, once per turn. And then to finish off the monsters, I play 1 copy of Ogdo Abyss, the Ogdoatic Overlord. This card is probably the best monster in the deck, just because of how Ogdo Abyss is this deck's answer to the Dragoon. But it has the effect of, in order to summon itself from the graveyard, you have to tribute 3. But once while it's on the field, while it's special summoned from the graveyard, quick effect. You can send all monsters from the field to the graveyard that accept face-up monsters special summoned from the graveyard. So, because it sends without targeting or destroying, this can take care of Dragoon easily. Like, I'll bait it out with something like Snake Rain, and then it'll be like, okay, Ogdo Abyss comes out, send everything, and then proceed to wreck face. It is amazing. And then, moving on to the spells, I play 1 copy of Foolish Burial, 1 copy of Monster Reborn, so I can summon from the graveyard. Foolish Burial sends a monster from the deck to the graveyard. Then, probably one of the best cards, if not the most important spell in the deck, is 3 copies of Snake Rain. You discard a card, send 4 reptiles from your deck to the grave. And with Ogdoatic, that is amazing. Then I play 3 copies of Ogdoatic Origin. Ogdoatic Origin just says if a face-up reptile you control is destroyed by a battle or an opponent's card effect, you can target 1 card your opponent controls and send it to the graveyard. And then if Origin is destroyed by an opponent's card while it's in the face-up in the field zone, you can send cards from the top of your opponent's deck to the graveyard equal to the different reptiles in your graveyard. So if you have 8 different reptiles in your grave, your top 8 cards of your opponent's deck get sent to the grave. So it actually punishes your opponent for having destroyed it in the first place. Then I play what can also be debated as the most important spell, if not the second most. And that is 3 copies of Ogdoatic Water Lily. Water Lily's effect is you can send 1 reptile from your deck to the graveyard. Then if you have 5 or more reptiles with different names in your grave, you can Monster Reborn 1 back. You can activate 1 Water Lily per turn. So this card's great because it's a foolish burial for reptiles while also being a Monster Reborn. Then to finish off the spells, I play 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. Banish 3 to 6 random cards from your extra deck, draw 2. The reason I play this is because this version of ogdoatic doesn't really care about its extra deck, so it doesn't really matter that much. Moving on to the traps. I play 1 copy of Ogdoatic Hollow. Ogdoatic Hollow just says during the main phase you contribute a reptile effect monster. So, and then you can target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon to your field, but it gets sent to the graveyard during the end phase. So I like this because if you see an opponent has a monster in their graveyard that is important, like for example, your opponent summons Rusty Bardige, and then they send Phantom Knight Silent Boots to the grave, or Ancient Cloak. You can use Hollow to tribute a reptile, to then summon that Phantom Knight from the graveyard to your field. And then they either have to attack over it, or just wait until the end of the turn when it gets sent to the graveyard anyway. So I just like it because it's a disruption card. Or you can use it in response to your opponent activating Invocation, summon Alistair to your field, which is actually going to be pretty cute. Then I play 2 copies of Ogdoatic Calling. Calling just special summons 2 Ogdoatic tokens. They're level 2 Dark Reptiles with 0 attack and 0 defense. But if you have 8 or more different Ogdoatic monsters with different names in your grave, so in this case, like 1 of each, for example. Well, that would be 9, but still. Then you can special summon 2 reptiles with different names from your graveyard. You can activate 1 calling per turn. Usually when this is activated, I'm summoning the 2 tokens. But I've only ever actually activated its effect summon 2 twice, and that usually gets negated. Then moving on to the other traps, I play 2 copies of Rise of the Snake Deity, and 3 copies of Offering to the Snake Deity. Offering to the Snake Deity's effect is you target 1 reptile on your field and 2 cards to your opponent's field. Destroy all 3 targets. And then Rise of the Snake Deity just says that if Phenomenon, the King of Poison Snakes you control, is destroyed by card effect, special summon 1 Phenomenaga from your hand or deck. That's pretty much it, but Phenomenaga's effects basically say it's unaffected by other card effects, so I feel like it's a good card. However, if you wanted to play hand traps, I would suggest taking out Offering to the Snake Deity, Rise to the Snake Deity, and Phenomenaga for things like Ash Blossom, Infinite Impermanence, DD Crow, Lancia, things that you know your opponent won't be able to deal with. So that is it for the main deck. Oops. Accidentally bumped my camera. Moving on to the extra deck. I play 2 copies of Reptilian Echidna. Echidna's effect is when it's link summoned, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, reduce its attack to 0. And then while this link summoned monster is in play, you can target, or you can add 1 reptile from your deck to your hand for each monster your opponent controls that has 0 attack points. So it's actually an extender in this deck, which is why I like playing Calling, because it is a control deck. Then I play 1 copy of Alien Shock Trooper M-Frame, or Mighty Frame as I like to call it. But its effect is when it's summoned, you discard a reptile monster to then place A counters on monsters your opponent controls, your choice on how they get distributed. But when it's destroyed in battle or by an opponent's card effects, you can monster reborn reptiles from your graveyard with different names, equal to the number of monsters your opponent controls with 8 counters. So usually, this is basically like a reptile version of Soul Charge, which, if done in the right way, can actually be devastating. Then I play 3 copies of Nightmare Phoenix to deal with back row, Nightmare Unicorn to get rid of annoying cards that float. Okay. 1 copy of Topologic Trisbana to deal with back row, Borlo to deal with things I can't beat over, Boral Sword to deal with things that are really big, Abyss Dweller to deal with the mirror match, 3 copies of King of the Feral Imp, just as a generic rank 4 that lets you search for any reptile, and 1 copy of Dingirsu. Dingirsu is fun just because of how it can come up when your opponent's not expecting it, and it's just funny to do. But that is it for my extra deck. Moving on to my side deck. I play 3 copies of Drone Lockbird for decks that are search heavy like Drytron. 3 copies of DD Crow for Invoked because the regionals, the locals I go to, there's a lot of Invoked players, so getting rid of the Alistair as soon as possible is useful. I also play 3 copies of Artifact Lancia, also because dinos are there a lot, so Lancia helps. Also, Lancia is good against Invoked. System down for ABC and Drytron. And then Mask of Restrict, just because I don't know how ogdoatic does against Monarch, but Monarch does show up every once in a while. But also it's good against Drytron, because how are you going to Ritual Summon if you can't Tribute? That is it for my ogdoatic deck profile. If you have any ideas of what I can do to improve the deck, or just have any ideas of decks you would like me to make, or have ideas of decks you want to see face each other, feel free to comment below. Thanks for watching.